Good book, landmark book, kids book, but good stuff. Some deep, important ideas and lessons about education and learning and thinking and science. This is a book most everyone, or a lot of people should read to learn about how science is done and how we learn, how education should work, things like that. Um, so, this one, written by Quentin Reynolds, one of the landmark books. When was this published? Let me see. Um, Copyright 1950 by Random House, renewed 1978. But I need this to help me read better, make it clear. Otherwise, it's kind of like hard to make out in a less when there's less light. But here's a little bit of it. Good stuff throughout. But this part at the beginning is interesting. As I say, some important, good lessons for how this stuff works. Education, science, thinking. First chapter, learning from mother. So this is the first chapter. The way it starts out, characterization, learning other things. This is freaking awesome. I love the hell out of this. So, Susan Wright wasn't like other mothers. She was younger and prettier than most other mothers, and she liked to laugh, and she liked to play games with the three youngest children, Wilbur, who was 11, Orville, who was 7, and Catherine, who was 4. The other mothers would shake their heads and say, Susan Wright spoils those children, lets them do anything they want. No good will come of it. But Susan Wright only laughed. In the summer, she'd pack a picnic lunch, and she, the 2 boys, and little Kate, no one ever called her Catherine, would go and spend a day in the woods. Mrs. Wright knew the name of every bird, and she could tell a bird by his song. Wilbur and Orville learned to tell birds too. One day, they sat on the banks of a river near Dayton, where they lived. Wilbur and Orville were fishing. Everyone called Wilbur Will, and of course Orville was Orv. The fish weren't biting very well. Suddenly a big bird swooped down, stuck his long bill into the river, and came out with a tiny fish, and then swooped right up into the sky again. Whoops. What makes a bird fly, Mother? Wilbur asked. Their wings, Will, she said. You notice they move their wings, and that makes them go faster. But Mother, Will said, not quite satisfied, that bird just swooped down. That bird that just swooped down didn't even move his wings. He swooped down, grabbed a fish, then went right up again. He never moved his wings at all. The wind doesn't just blow toward you or away from you, she said. It blows up and down too. When a current of air blows up, it takes the bird up. His wings support him in the air. If we had wings, then we could fly too, couldn't we, Mother? Wilbur asked. But God didn't give us wings, she laughed. Maybe we could make wings, Wilbur insisted. Maybe, his mother said thoughtfully, but I don't know. No one ever did make wings that would allow a boy to fly. I will someday, Wilbur said, and Orville nodded and said, I will too. Well, when you're a little older, maybe you can try, their mother said. That was another thing about Susan Wright. Most other mothers would have thought this was foolish talk. Most other mothers would have said, oh, don't be silly. Who ever heard of such nonsense? But not Susan Wright. She knew that even an 11-year-old boy can have ideas of his own. And just because they happen to come from an 11-year-old head, well, that didn't make them foolish. She never treated her children as if they were babies. And perhaps that's why they liked to go fishing with her or on picnics with her. And that's why they kept asking her questions. Unquote. There's food for thought for some teachers. Don't denigrate your students or treat them like children. Treat them like young, questioning minds, young adults. They don't know as much, of course, and they're younger, but high school kids should not be treated like elementary school kids. Quote, she always gave them sensible answers. They asked their father questions too, but he was a traveling minister and he was away a lot. It's getting chilly, Mrs. Wright said suddenly. Look at those gray clouds, Will. Wilbur looked up. It's going to snow, I bet, he said happily. No more picnics until next spring, his mother said. Yes, it looks like snow. We'd better be getting home. As they reached home, the first big white snowflakes started to fall. They kept falling all that night and all the next day. It was the first real snowstorm of the year. In the morning, the wind was blowing so fiercely that Wilbur found it hard to walk to the barn where wood was stored. The wind was so strong it almost knocked him down. He burst through the kitchen door with an armful of wood for the stove, and he told his mother about the wind. The thing to do is to lean forward into the wind, she said. Bend over, and that way you get closer to the ground and you get under the wind. That night, when Wilbur had to make the trip for more wood, he tried his mother's idea. To his surprise, it worked. When he was bent over, the wind didn't seem nearly so strong. Unquote. How's that for someone who's going to study the plane and be the first ones to make a plane that could go far and turn later in life? Things build upon things. Fascinating. When one knows the bigger picture and one gets his stuff, then this becomes fascinating. To some people, it's just like, oh, you're just reading this one thing and there's nothing else. But when you got a whole broad, deep, philosophic, historical, and scientific context to bring into this, you know how people can be miseducated, people misunderstand science and all this stuff. You know how people can do things right and do wrong. This is like freaking significant and awesome. So much in it. Quote, after a few days, the wind stopped, and now the whole countryside was covered with snow. Wilbur and Orville, with little Kate trailing behind, hurried to the big hill not far from the house, unquote. So they're going to sled. Most people make their own sled. They can't afford to buy them. And then Wilbur and Orville, of course, want a sled. And so it says, quote, late that afternoon, the boys came home with Kate behind them, and their mother noticed that they were very quiet. She soon found out why they were unhappy. Why doesn't Father build us a sled? Wilbur blurted out. But Father is away, Will, his mother said gently. And you know how busy he is when he is at home. He has to write stories for the church paper and he has to write sermons. Now suppose we build a sled together. Wilbur laughed. Who ever heard of anyone's mother building a sled? But she does. How freaking awesome. Amazing. You just wait, his mother said. We'll build a better sled than Ed Signs has. Now get me a pencil and a piece of paper. You gonna build a sled out of paper? Orville asked in amazement. Just wait, she repeated. Chapter 2, Getting It Right on Paper. Will and Orv brought their mother a pencil and paper, and she went to the minister's desk and found a ruler. Then she sat down at the kitchen table. First, we'll draw a picture of the sled, she said. What good is a picture of a sled? Orville asked. Now, Orville watched Mother. She picked up the ruler in one hand and the pencil in the other. We want one like Ed Signs has, Orville said. When you go coasting, how many boys will Ed Signs' sled hold? She asked. 2, Wilbur said. We'll make this one big enough to hold 3, she said. Maybe you can take Kate along sometimes. The outline of a sled began to appear on the paper. As she drew it, she talked. You see, Ed's sled is about 4 feet long, and I've seen it often enough. We'll make this one 5 feet long. Now, Ed's sled is about a foot off the ground, isn't it? Orville nodded, his eyes never leaving the drawing that was taking shape. It was beginning to look like a sled now, but not like the sleds the other boys had. You made it too low, Will said. You want a sled that's faster than Ed's sled, don't you? His mother smiled. Well, Ed's sled is at least a foot high. Our sled will be lower, closer to the ground. It won't meet so much wind resistance. Wind resistance? It was the first time Wilbur had ever heard the expression. He looked blankly at his mother. Remember the blizzard last week? She asked. Remember when you went out to the woodshed and the wind was so strong you could hardly walk to the shed? I told you to lean over, and on the next trip to the woodshed you did. When you came back with an armful of wood, you laughed and said, Mother, I leaned way forward and got under the wind. You were closer to the ground and you were able to lessen the wind resistance. Now, the closer to the ground our sled is, the less wind resistance there will be, and the faster it will go. Wind resistance, Wilbur repeated, and maybe the airplane was born in that moment. Certainly neither Will nor Orville Wright ever forgot that first lesson in speed. How do you know about these things, Mother? Wilbur asked. You'd be surprised how much mothers know, Will, she laughed. She didn't tell the boys that when she was a little girl at school, her best subject had been arithmetic. It just came naturally to her. It was the same when she went to high school, and when she went to college, algebra and geometry were her best subjects. That was why she knew all about things like wind resistance. Finally, she finished the drawing. The boys leaned over the table to look at it. This sled was going to be longer than Ed's sled and much narrower. Ed's sled was about 3 feet wide. This one looked as if it would be only half that wide. You made it narrow, Ed said shrewdly, to make it faster. The narrower it is, the less wind resistance. That's right, his mother said. Now let's put down the exact length of the runners and the exact width of the sled. But that's only a paper sled, Orville protested. If you get it right on paper, she said calmly, it'll be right when you build it. Always remember that. If you get it right on paper, it will be right when you build it, Wilbur repeated, but his mother looked at him sharply. Sometimes Will seemed older than his 11 years. Little Orville was quick to give you an answer to anything, but as often as not, he'd forget the answer right away. When Will learned something, he never forgot it. Mother, you can make all your clothes, Wilbur said thoughtfully. You always make a drawing first. We call that the pattern, his mother said. I draw and then cut out a pattern that's exactly the size of the dress I'm going to make. And if the pattern is right, it'll be right when you make the dress. He finished. She nodded. Now, when you two boys get started on your sled, she smiled. Now you two boys get started on your sled. She smiled. There are plenty of planks in the barn. Find the very lightest ones. Don't use planks with knots in them. You saw the planks to the right size, Will. Don't let Orville touch the saw. May we use Father's tools? Wilbur asked, breathlessly. His mother nodded. I don't think your father will mind. I know you'll be careful with them. Just follow the drawing exactly, she warned once more. The two boys and Kate hurried out to the barn. They realized that this was an important occasion. Wilbur always chopped the wood for the stove when his father was away, but he had never been allowed to use the gleaming tools that lay in his father's tool chest. 3 days later, their sled was finished. They pulled it out of the barn and asked their mother to inspect it. She had her tape measure with her, and she measured it. The runners were exactly the length she had put down in her drawing. In fact, The boys had followed every direction she had given them. The runners gleamed. Orville had polished them with sandpaper until they were as smooth as silk. We thought of one other thing, Mother, Will said. We found some old candles in the woodshed. We rubbed the runners with the candles. See how smooth they are? Mrs. Wright nodded. She had forgotten to tell the boys that, but they'd thought of it out for themselves. Now try your sled, she told them. So, unquote. Awesome freaking stuff. How can you not be emotional about this? This is so freaking awesome. The thought, the respect for thought, the developing curiosity, doing things for themselves, developing the independence of these kids, teaching them how to be independent and appreciating it, so they can grow up to be self-sovereign, independent adults, which they did. Everyone should be like this to different extents. We can't all be Wright brothers and Wright sisters or whatever and invent the airplane or whatever, but we can do things in our lives independently, and we should. The encouragement, the respect, using tools at 11 and younger, freaking awesome. Being practical, not just memorizing a bunch of book crap. Books are important, we need them, but they're just like roadmaps, just like drawing the diagram or the picture. It's the real thing that matters. Or like some people, learning from other people, some books, we do that to some extent, but some of that is just looking at a roadmap of someone else's vacation. We don't take the vacation, we don't own the vacation until we've taken it ourselves. Then we know it. Otherwise, it's just looking at someone else's pictures and stuff. And so they get the sled, they go out, they race their friends, and they win. Everyone's amazed because Will and Orv's sled just flies down the slope, goes faster than the others, and it says it goes like, I don't know. I'd have to read some other biographies of the Wright brothers, not just some fictional account like this. I don't know to what extent she looked into it and all that. Fictionalized stuff, biography, but or him, Quentin, Reynolds. I don't know to what extent he dug into their biography. I have to look at some stuff, dig into that, but and thus the story is the sled went like 100 yards further than anyone else. And they were amazed. So, and then there's other, interesting stuff in here. About bicycles and all that, but good stuff. A lot to learn in there. Real science comes from experience and observation, not memorizing stuff in a book. There's this, it's both observational, experiential, real, and conceptual. It involves this integration and connection of the two. Being an experience immersed in reality and the cause-effect relationships and conceptualizing the things, abstracting away, like seeing how wind resistance comes up in sled design, or getting wood out of a barn, having that abstraction from the different things. So you got these different concrete things. A sled, a person walking, getting wood. How the hell are they related? Well, physically they are. We got these things moving and how they relate to the wind, the people moving, and then you can start to do it to other things. How does it relate to us? How does it relate to other things? They can feel it when the wind's blowing on them and how they can affect it. Then, as I say, apply that to other things as well. Then you got those. And then the bicycle in the airplane. We got this extension of the principle to new things. Once it's a principle and it's general already, you see what else it belongs to. In this development of ideas, It's not just wind resistance. Oh, we know wind resistance, so we can invent a plane. It's all this other stuff too. All the stuff they learned about bicycles and bicycle repair and having light machinery to do something well instead of just something heavy. Like, there are steam boats, but there aren't steam planes. We don't get some big old heavy, huge mongoose steamboat and rev up the engine and get it flying. We need the lightness. And that's one thing they learned in working with bicycles. But that's a little passage to read over. A lot of things to get out of there, as I say. How science develops, how we think, how when abstractions are real, and instead of a floating abstraction, some fake counterfeit thing, abstractions come from real experience, and you see why the idea is important. You see why ideas are important. Without this idea, they couldn't have done what they did. They had to make the connection, abstract, draw out this commonality, draw out what is in common with these things, and see that with the plane and all that. They got to use abstractions, appreciate ideas, appreciate thinking, planning, plan ahead before something is done, if it's going to be done right. And we got to do that. Ideas matter because they help us deal with experience and be more effective in the world. Have a plane that can get us places, have a sled that can help us have fun, have bicycles that can help us have fun or get places, seek help in an emergency, have fun, race to win money, all kinds of things like that. These ideas help them in certain ways. There's this unification. It's not, oh, education, we do our books. Okay, now we go to everyday life. No, it's wrapped up together. And it's cool how, the kids learn from their mom like that and how she knows so much like that. Oh, that's another good thing I like about this book. Awesomeness. She's got some very good lessons in there. And then think about some things like that. What else can you get out of it? But again, it's a good, no matter what age, a good introduction to how science works. A good book to read, have students write about. And notice that no matter what the age is, there's a lot of analysis you could do in there. Different things, different ages, different levels of abstraction, different knowledge about what science is. One level, how does it relate to where the Wright brothers were in history? How does it relate to Newton and how he did things, and Galileo and Darwin? How does it differ from the nonsense of Karl Popper? Were the Wright brothers making crap up and testing it? No, if they did that, they would never have developed an airplane that flies. It's just how kind of nonsensical it is, the Popper stuff. The Wright brothers immersed in reality. What is? How do cause-effect relationships work? Contrary to Hume, who's doubting causation and not being a scientist and making stuff up, the Wright brothers are in the world, being real, using causation to get things done, even while, like, Popper and Emmanuel, like Hume and some others are saying that there is no necessity in causation and stuff. They're like, the Wright brothers are being real and forgetting that nonsense and looking at the nature of things and cause-effect relationships, knowing we can get necessity from experience. Experience is valid, and we draw conclusions from it, and we can get scientific thinking that is effective and necessary and works from experience. A lot of lessons in there. I'll put some of this in the description, but too much to put in the entire description field. Maybe it's on Internet Archive or something. I can put a link to it, but I'll put a link to the book anyway on Amazon. Anyway, good lessons for thought, how to teach, how to parent, because we can all We should all be looking for ways to improve. We've got some things down. We're good at some things at what we can do. We can always do better. We should. Do we want it for the youth and for our kids and for like children and students? I hope so. So we can learn from some stuff from this book. As I say, we can use it, have students read it, get things out of it, write essays on it, all kinds of different levels of abstraction. Good lessons. Hope you enjoy. Peace.